The year was 1944. The wind that swept across the Texas plains carried the smell of dust and diesel, two scents that had marked her life long before the war. Her days began before sunrise, when the stars still clung to the horizon, and ended when her hands were too raw to grip the wrench. The war had taken her husband to Europe and left her with acres of stubborn wheat and a heart that refused to idle. She'd grown up beneath the endless sky, fixing tractors with her father, arguing with ranch hands, learning how to judge the land not by maps, but by instinct. When the Army posted a small notice in Amarillo, mechanics and machine operators needed for overseas service, she stood in line before dawn, hat low, heart steady. By midsummer, she was aboard a Liberty ship that groaned like an old bull in storm water, crossing the Atlantic under blackout orders. The men barely looked at her. A woman in fatigues was still an oddity, even after Rosie's factories. But she wasn't made of silk and slogans. She was made of grease, grit, and windburn. When an engine coughed, she listened. When a tank stalled, she could smell the problem before anyone reached for a tool. The officers noticed. Within weeks, she was transferred from maintenance to a frontline tank destroyer unit, the kind that chewed through crews faster than they could write new names on the hull. Her new post was somewhere near the hedgerows of Normandy, where smoke clung to the trees like cobwebs. The unit commander, a square-jawed sergeant from Michigan, laughed when he saw her. "You're the new mechanic?" he asked, half disbelieving. She just nodded and asked where the nearest M10 Wolverine was parked. The crew, for men who'd already buried two commanders, watched her approach the tank like a farmer inspecting a stubborn mule. Within minutes, she'd found a cracked coupling the others had missed for days. When she started the engine, it purred low and smooth, like the sound of home before the harvest. They called her ma'am at first, half in jest, half in fear of reprimand. But in the field, rank was written in results. The first time they faced the enemy together, the sky was gray with the promise of rain. German armor had pushed through the outskirts of a French village, their turrets glinting under distant lightning. Her crew hesitated, calculating range, checking maps. She leaned out of the hatch and squinted at the mud. "They'll bog down there," she said, pointing toward a shallow dip in the field. "Wait till they reach the puddle's edge." It was the same tone she used back on the farm, warning her brothers not to drive the tractor too close to the ditch. When the first Panzer slipped, she gave the order. The 3-inch gun fired, and the blast rolled across the valley like thunder chasing its own echo. Smoke, shouts, and the smell of burnt oil filled the air. 3 tanks fell before the rest realized they were trapped. By sundown, the crew had destroyed 12, their ammunition nearly gone, their disbelief complete. The sergeant sat on the turret afterward, grinning through exhaustion. "Guess Texas grows more than cattle," he said. She smiled, wiping soot from her cheek. "We just grow what needs doing." Word spread faster than the fires that marked their victories. Other crews started to copy her method, studying soil, reading the terrain before the fight. She told them she wasn't guessing. She was farming the battlefield, sowing patience and reaping precision. She understood how machines sank when the ground was too soft, how a few extra degrees of angle could mean life or death. Her logic was simple, almost absurd in its clarity. A field was a field, even when it was filled with steel. Still, every night when she lay under the thin canvas sky, she thought of home, the cracked porch, the distant thunder of storms rolling over the plains. War was supposed to harden people, but it only made her more aware of how fragile life was. She wrote letters she never sent, one to her husband whose last message came from somewhere near the Ardennes, signed with a smudge instead of a name. The men teased her gently, calling her boss ma'am or the Iron Widow, but they followed her orders with a devotion born of awe. As weeks turned to months, her tank became more than a machine. It was a breathing thing, a creature that responded to her touch and trembled when danger approached. The crew learned her silences meant more than her commands. When she said, "We wait," they waited. When she whispered, "Now," they fired. Each victory stitched their fates tighter together, a patchwork family bound by smoke and survival. One night, as artillery flared on the horizon, the youngest of the crew, barely 20, with freckles hidden under grime, asked her how she knew where the enemy would strike. She poked the dirt with a stick, drawing slow lines in the mud. "Same way you know where the rain's gonna fall," she said. "You listen. You look where the ground's tired." He didn't understand then, but by morning he would. Their next mission came with almost no warning, an ambush order along a narrow French road where the Germans were expected to advance. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that made every breath taste like iron. She adjusted the elevation by hand, eyes fixed on a patch of distant movement. The sergeant beside her muttered, "They'll flank from the left." She shook her head. "No. They'll come straight through the ditch. It's firm there. They don't know it rained here 3 days ago." And she was right. When the column rolled into view, their treads glistening with morning dew, she fired first. The explosion ripped the silence apart. Flames rose behind hedgerows, and within minutes the field was a graveyard of twisted metal. The crew sat in stunned quiet, breathing through the static of their radios. One of them finally said, "How'd you?" She cut him off gently. "Because I remember what dry earth sounds like when it's ready to break." That night, her name was scribbled into a field report as Commander M.J., unverified female operator. The official record never called her by name. But the soldiers who saw her tank roll through the mist didn't need paperwork. They whispered instead. A woman from Texas, they said, who read the ground like scripture and made iron obey. They didn't know that somewhere in her duffel, folded between grease rags and spare maps, was a single photograph of a wheat field under a setting sun. It was the same sun that rose now over France, gilding the wreckage of 12 panzers, and the beginning of a legend that no one yet understood. By autumn, the fields of Europe no longer looked like earth but like the scarred hide of something that had bled too long. The girl from Texas, her face now lined with smoke and sleeplessness, had become less a curiosity and more a myth among the armored ranks. Her 4-man crew followed her without question, their bond fused by fire and faith. They no longer asked how she knew when to move or when to strike, they simply did. Her tank, once dull olive, was now a collage of scorch marks and chalk tallies, each mark a German tank silenced, each dent a near miss that should have killed them all. It had been 120 days since that first ambush near Normandy, and the count stood at 358 enemy tanks destroyed. No one believed it, at least not officially. Command dismissed her reports as clerical error, assuming the kills were cumulative across multiple platoons. But the crews who fought alongside her knew better. They'd seen her read the terrain like scripture, seen her tilt her head as if listening to something buried beneath the soil. "She don't fight the enemy," one gunner whispered. "She fights the land, and makes it choose sides." Their latest assignment brought them near Aachen, where the cold came early and the air smelled like stone and fear. The town was rubble stacked upon more rubble, and the Germans defended every inch of it like it was the last breath of the Reich. 4 days, rain turned the roads to tar, and tanks sank halfway into the mud before firing a single shot. The crew stayed inside their M18 Hellcat for nearly 36 hours straight, running on cold rations and coffee so thick it felt like oil. She barely spoke, except to give coordinates or mechanical corrections. Her voice had become the sound of certainty, flat, calm, unshakable. On the 4th night, their orders were simple. Cover the retreat of an infantry column pinned near a burned-out monastery. Intelligence claimed a small panzer unit was moving through the valley. She studied the map under a flickering red lamp, tracing the contour lines with a gloved finger. "They won't come through the main road," she said quietly. "They'll use the orchard slope. It's high ground, dry soil, good traction." The sergeant frowned. "That's suicide for them." She didn't look up. So was Normandy. Before dawn, fog crawled over the valley, thick and damp as cotton. The world narrowed to a few yards of visibility. They waited in silence, engine idling low, the metal of the turret slick with dew. Through the mist came the first low growl of engines. Then another. Dozens. The sound rolled over them like distant thunder building strength. The youngest crewman, the freckled one, swallowed hard. "Ma'am," he whispered, "how many do you think?" She checked her watch. Enough to remember. The first muzzle flash tore the fog apart. She swung the turret before the crew could react, firing blind into the white void. The recoil slammed through the hull, shaking dust from the seams. A second flash, then a blast of orange as their shot found its mark. The air filled with the shriek of shells and the stink of cordite. She shouted over the chaos, calm but fierce. "Rotate 10 degrees, Fire again. The loader moved like muscle memory, and the next round hit before the echo of the first had died. One by one, German tanks lit up through the mist, their flames turning the fog into molten gold. Minutes became hours, and hours felt like years compressed into noise. The Hellcat's barrel glowed red, paint blistering. She adjusted aim by feel, counting seconds between enemy volleys. Every instinct she'd learned on the Texas plains, reading wind, slope, weight, silence, now ruled the battlefield. When the ammunition ran low, they scavenged from wrecks, crawling through smoke and ash while artillery thundered overhead. Each man carried shells as if they were sacred offerings, trusting her to turn them into salvation. By midday, the valley was quiet. The fog had burned away, leaving only heat distortions above the wrecks. The orchard slope was littered with steel carcasses, black against the pale earth. The sergeant climbed out first, staggering like a man who had woken from a dream. He counted softly, mouthing numbers as if they were prayers. 23, 28, 31 tanks destroyed in less than 7 hours. She sat on the turret, helmet in her lap, staring at the smoke curling skyward. "It's over," he said. She shook her head. "Not until the ground cools." That night, their radio crackled with static and disbelief. Headquarters demanded confirmation, then silence, then more confirmation. Finally, a voice, tired, bureaucratic, said the reports were under review. She didn't bother replying. Her war wasn't in the records. It was in the soil, the same soil she once plowed with horses and hope. The men celebrated anyway, passing around a dented flask, laughing like boys too alive to understand what they'd done. She smiled faintly, then slipped away from the firelight, standing alone beside the tank. The moonlight caught the side armor, glinting off the chalked numbers. She thought of her husband, if he still breathed somewhere, and of the wheat fields that waited for her hands. In the distance, artillery flashed like heat lightning, silent from this far away. The crew would move again at dawn. There was always another valley, another convoy, another line of tanks. But something inside her knew this night marked the end of their luck. Victory carried a weight that only survivors could feel. She brushed her fingers over the steel, warm still, and whispered, "You've done enough." When morning came, frost clung to the grass, and the tank gleamed silver in the early light. She climbed aboard, expression unreadable, eyes fixed on the road ahead. They drove toward the next horizon, into another day of fire and dust, the same 4 souls bound to one machine. No medals, no glory, just the quiet knowledge that a farmer from Texas had changed the rhythm of war itself. And somewhere behind them, the valley still smoked, its ashes whispering the story no one would ever fully believe. Which city are you watching our video from? For more powerful stories from World War II, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you.